the stakes are higher in FedRAMP types of environments as well, because now you're dealing with a lot of federal data. You're processing and storing, retrieving that sort of data within your environment. I mean, I get why the process was at first being very strenuous and so on, but I'm glad we're beginning to see that a lot of that isn't completely necessary, or shall I say, we've evolved a good bit within specifically cloud security to enable more secure, fast types of channels. For instance, one of the things on the OMB memo aforementioned is being able to submit your SSBs in OSCAL format and going more towards that programmatic approach to things, which has always been central to what us at HanaByte does. That is a perfect example of how the technology is just moving quicker than a federal program can actually keep up with. And now we're just seeing that cruise ship kind of adjust.
Hello, friends, homies, enemies, frenemies, Sigma Rizzlers, as my kids would say, Skibbity Rizzlers, if that's your jam, if you're not so cool. But you know what? You're all welcome here to another episode of the Paramify podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Scott, and I'm so pumped to be here with a new friend of mine, Eric Evans, who's the founder and chief technology officer of HanaByte. HanaByte is a security consultancy focused on delivering state-of-the-art solutions in the cloud. They specialize in delivering cloud services with an emphasis in information security. All right. Eric is a frequent public speaker. He's a top voice on social media in cloud security, compliance automation, application supply chain security. And he's led and supported a lot of security engagements for clients ranging from startups, people just figuring it out, to Fortune 10 companies across various industries. So beyond his professional achievements, Eric's also a proud dad and of a human, and he also has 2 dogs, right? And we're thrilled to have you, Eric, on the show. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited as well.
Right on. Right. So I think let's just get into this. Today you posted something awesome. I saw you posted on LinkedIn. Let me read this real quick. It says, it wasn't too long ago that FedRAMP High meant you had to use only basic services like compute engine and cloud networking, in Google. But now there's well over 100 services in FedRAMP High for Google Cloud. And it got me thinking, that we really are kind of at a tipping point. Just the other day on Monday, the General Services Administration, GSA, and the Federal Security Cloud Advisory Committee, FSCAC, or whatever it's going to be. But they voted on Monday to focus on 2 main priorities over the next year to make FedRAMP, 1, easier to use, which I'm excited about, and 2, be able to provide more rapid certifications of cloud products and services. So I know that we're in this right now, and we always say like, hey, we can't make anybody fall in love, because the hardest thing has been like, how do we get a sponsor? Anyways, those are some of the things I'm thinking of right now. Tell me a little bit about your post and just how far we've come, in FedRAMP.
Yeah, definitely. So when I read that, I was really excited, and I wanted to kind of like congratulate the Google Cloud Public Sector team on being able to achieve that. I mean, it hasn't been long ago where if someone told me you need to be in a FedRAMP High environment, or we need to build out a IL4 type of architecture, kind of like FedRAMP Plus type of architecture, where we would have to utilize only what is authorized for FedRAMP High. I mean, that's still true today. But the number of services I could probably count on, like my hands. And so it's kind of like figuring out, okay, I could only use virtual machines. I can only use, VPCs and maybe cloud storage, and that's about it. I wouldn't have the luxury of using some of the other services like Google Kubernetes Engine or the same thing for other clouds too. I work within AWS and I work within Azure as well. And very similar type of the deals there. We'd have to start off with primitive, and I mean primitive in the nicest way because they're well used today still, but you would have to start off with these building blocks, right, in order to actually build these FedRAMP Pi type of architectures. And it took a lot of creativity, to put it nicely, in order to get all those solutions to work well when you're so accustomed to being able to use things like, Lambda functions, serverless functions, things like that, which didn't necessarily have an ATO at the time. And, learning all that really it's a niche skill. Then it's like, okay, so we have some reference architectures that are FedRAMP High compliant, and then they would look at it and it looks like a data center essentially, because we're, again, using just servers where we could use something like a platform as a service solution, but again, not yet received its ATO, not yet FedRAMP High.
You're like
then the
cloud,
second thing,
but you're not cloud, right?
exactly.
It's like
It reminds me of when doing lift and shifts from the data center and just making the architecture look like what a data center would typically be.
No fun, man. Sorry, I cut you off. You said the second thing.
Yeah, the second thing I wanted to mention, because you mentioned it as well, is the Federal Secure Cloud Advisory Committee, and kind of like what's going on with that. So I think it's excellent. And, this was outlined in the FedRAMP OMB memo that came out late last year. I'm not sure if you remember that one. I did a pretty good write-up on it, by the way, on the HanaByte website.
Let's link it in the show notes. We'll get keen on that. Make sure to send it to me. We'll get it in there.
Yeah, for sure. And I did a pretty good breakdown of that memo. And I'll go ahead and say this. Opinion's mine, not opinion of HanaByte, but definitely myself, is I think FedRAMP is pretty broken at this point. You've only have a little over 300 authorizations in a ecosystem that has hundreds of thousands of solutions. So with this many solutions available for the federal government to deliver its mission to, whether it be, the military DOD, or whether it just be someone who's processing our, small business loan applications or whatever it may be, those agencies, they are now limited to only those specific solutions that have gone through this onerous process.
Right.
And it is so welcome to see new pathways and new ways that, specifically with the FSCAC, collaboration with the industry, with folks like, I saw Shellman on there. I saw some other folks who are in the security space as well, that are now collaborating with the federal government and using this as a way to find easier ways to get FedRAMPed and so on. And I think that's where things are moving towards. And we're going to start seeing a lot more solutions getting there as well. You no longer just have to worry about those two traditional pathways, which is either agency sponsor or JAB. There's other pathways kind of coming through as well. The JAB's going away,
Oh, dude. God be thanked for that, man. Jeez. It's like, I agree with you. And I think they agree with you. They've realized, there's changes there. FedRAMP is really hard, right? Because it's coming from NIST 800-53. It's a subset of those controls. And I think there's a lot of confusion of, when I talk to clients, they say, I think we're going to go for, low impact SaaS. And I'm like, oh, all right. What kind of data do you have? Well, we have medical information about like surgery procedures. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's a pretty high integrity objective normally. So you're going to have a hard time justifying that low impact SaaS if there's just so much confusion, and it's not really their fault. It's just a lot, right? And security is really, really, really hard. And we have this high expectation that, for some, we say this, there's this expectation that, assume breach, but then when you do actually get breached, everybody's freaking out, and they become the whipping boy of of the public internet, for a little while, but it's
Always want to say we want to put you in the news headlines for good reasons, not for the bad reasons.
yeah. I mean, yeah, FedRAMP is really, really great because when you do actually implement it correctly, when big companies, they have these breaches, it's not their FedRAMP environments that are getting popped. It's an environment that's doesn't have the level of scrutiny that you get in FedRAMP. I'm not saying that you can't pop a FedRAMP environment. Yes, you can. It's just a lot harder, and there's so much low-hanging fruit for other folks that have nefarious, objectives, that they're just going to go somewhere else, right? So
yeah, for sure. And the stakes are higher in FedRAMP types of environments as well, because now you're dealing with a lot of federal data. You're processing and storing, retrieving that sort of data within your environment. I mean, I get why the process was at first being very strenuous and so on, but I'm glad we're beginning to see that a lot of that isn't completely necessary, or shall I say, we've evolved a good bit within specifically cloud security to enable more secure, fast types of channels. For instance, one of the things on the OMB memo, aforementioned, is being able to submit your SSBs in OSCAL format and going more towards that programmatic approach to things, which has always been central to what us at HanaByte does. That is a perfect example of how the technology is just moving quicker than a federal program can actually keep up with. And now we're just seeing that cruise ship kind of adjust, so to speak.
Yeah, we're, obviously OSCAL is really big for us. We talk on it all the time, and we're connected with the folks at NIST, and I'm super excited for that innovation. And fortunately, there are a lot of people who care about this, who care about really securing our critical infrastructure. It's an effort that takes all of us, and yeah, I'm excited for the OSCAL innovation. It's always been a big priority for us as well. I want to read one other quote from that thing the other day, from Monday. It said this committee, okay, yeah, so this is the committee between GSA and FS-CAC. FS, yeah. Says, this committee helps ensure effective and ongoing coordination of agencies' adoption, use, authorization, monitoring, acquisition, and security of cloud computing products and services to help them meet their mission and administrative priorities. It's kind of a run-on sentence, but I mean, what do you expect? It's okay. I'm going to give them credit here. I'm excited to see what happens. It does feel different. It does feel like, yeah, okay, you've heard us, and I'm excited to be a part of that solution, right? So cool. Well, let's jump into you, Eric, in HanaByte. Tell us about HanaByte and what inspired you to start the company.
Yeah, for sure. Without going through my whole life story, I'll kind of get into I got into
for sure.
Security. And
summarize
I mean,
it.
We're on a podcast. Summarize it, of course. But I've always come from an automation, a DevOps background. I taught myself how to program when I was like 14 years old, and thought it was the coolest thing to just be able to deploy websites. Here I was working on PHP and MySQL and Linux and age 15 and kind of going on from there. But one thing to another, I was pretty much born in the cloud. So whenever I started getting to the point where I was deploying my own servers and so on, I started with building like an AWS account, like opening one up, starting an EC2 instance, doing my installations of all the software there. And at the time, my title was software developer, even though I'm creating automated pipelines. And this was back in 2012, 2013, when it was like really early on for this type of stuff. I guess I won't, I always stop and say I'm not a pioneer in the DevSecOps space, because there are pioneers out there, right? But I just kind of built and developed this stuff myself, where it would take my code and would automatically package it and deploy it onto the server and everything. And I just thought that's what software developers do. They write their code and then they see it over to, production as well. I then did an interview for a startup here in Atlanta, told them what I was doing. They're like, Eric, you're more of a DevOps engineer than you are a software developer. I'm like, really? They're like, yeah, you're making these pipelines and you're doing, security checks within the pipelines and everything. We need a DevOps engineer. And the position you've applied for, which is software developer, you could definitely do that, but you're more suited for DevOps. And I was like, perfect. So I kind of fell into the DevOps realm. And then one of my first tasks was, hey, Eric, we need someone to take care of PCI scans. We need someone to take care of our kind of security program and so on. And I fell into security and then I learned about it and how it kind of goes. And, kind of to skip a few steps ahead, I helped kind of build some information security programs here in the Atlanta area. Always kept it automation, DevOps first. It's always been my jam. It's still my jam today.
Right. Yeah, we love what you're doing.
Yeah, and really started sharpening my teeth when I got into consulting on the compliance aspect of things. And that's where, I was leading engagements at some points where it was bringing folks through the ATO process, learning how to build compliant solutions in the cloud. But then I remember thinking that I can automate everything away, because that's the typical DevOps SRE type of mindset is automate everything that you can toil away and continuously do that so that your workload goes down so you can continue delivering faster. And I was like, great, but I found a point where you can only automate a certain amount of technical controls, but there's a lot of things you can't automate. And one of the big things was, you probably already know what it is, 1,000-page SSP packages, all the evidence gathering that goes along with that, figuring out how to write control statements. And I was just getting into, oh my gosh, this is a pain.
To say the least.
Yeah. Yes. And so the
Therapy
impetus
is required.
Therapy is absolutely required. I feel like I'm still going through the trauma today, but I do it therapeutically and positively through code and solutions, hence the impetus of HanaByte. So HanaByte, you mentioned I have 2 dogs. My first dog's name is Hana.
Okay.
And our company mascot, Hana, is, German Shepherd security. We kind of shepherd people through the ATO process, right?
I love it. That's
and
amazing.
bite, you could, yeah, HanaByte.
You could get.
She doesn't bite though.
She doesn't. Yeah. As long as she knows you're not food, right? So
exactly. We take a bite out of cybercrime, but we do it, in a very warm type of way. And that's where, I guess, let me put it the best way. HanaByte was kind of founded on a series of dichotomies, if you kind of think about it. So the first one is compliance versus security. I've always came from the security background and stumbled into compliance. I've heard a lot of people in the space, in the GRC space, they start off as auditors or they start off in compliance and are kind of learning the other way around.
Yep.
It's kind of funny because,
again,
I was born in the...
For sure.
Yeah. And that's a very common type of course. I'm kind of approaching it from the other way and saying, okay, I've started from this security approach and learning more about compliance. And I know that when I learned about compliance first, I'm like, why are we doing checklists for things that I can get in the AWS console or that I can get through API calls and so on? I'm like, whoa, guys, y'all, there's a more efficient way of doing this. So I kind of found a space where I can start solving problems. And it gives it's a good perspective from like a security practitioner standpoint, because then I can give great compliance advice to compliance professionals, but also to security professionals who are also learning about compliance, kind of like me as well, because I've been there. So a lot of scars, right?
You mentioned like these automation that you're building, where you have, the CLI that you're taking advantage of. There are so many automation tools where people will say like, hey, just turn this on and you get all of your SOC 2 taken care of for you. It's like you don't even have to do anything.
Right.
I don't think that's your approach, but what is it that sets HanaByte apart from other cybersecurity solution providers that are looking for maybe not an easy button, because I don't think the easy button exists, but you're helping them be successful with this tough problem of automation in cybersecurity? What sets you guys apart? What's your approach there?
Yeah. So yet another one of those dichotomies that I mentioned, right? And this one is between consulting / professional services and product building. So we have a unique blend of both compliance and engineering professionals, folks who are proficient in both. And we are able to build products that are API driven. And when I say products, I mean like internal products that we use to deliver our services, and partner with amazing people like Paramify in order to supercharge those types of deliveries. So when I first heard about Paramify, I'm like, wow, this is like, 2 or 3 steps ahead of what we're doing right now, because what we're doing is we're taking that control data, the evidence gathering, APIs from like endpoint management systems, from cloud providers, from, other GRC tools and so on, and we're putting it into OSCAL format, but we haven't gotten the entire document, ready and generated. And then when we see, the approach you guys were taking with, oh, well, there's a lot of control statements that are pretty standard for packages and can be used, especially if, you're inheriting from AWS or inheriting from Azure or Google Cloud, however we're doing it. That's the missing piece. And now we're able to create SSPs at lightning speed because of this Iron Man suit that you guys give us to let you fly around in, right?
I love it.
And that's kind of where we're going, right? So that's what sets us apart, is we're embracing this automation in a spot that really needs disruption. There's so much innovation that is being done in the GRC area. For instance, I heard this term, I don't know who coined it, but GRC engineering. I'm like, yeah, that's what we do. Like in many ways, right? We don't call ourselves GRC engineers. We call ourselves security consultants because we meet customers where they're at and so on. But it's definitely something that we have, right?
That's the difference right there. You meet them where they're at. There's not, that I've seen, a really effective one-size-fits-all solution because of the diversity of services being used. So where we knew that we were not going to be experts in how to use, how to build out the automation in Google Cloud, how to build out the automation even in AWS, even though we have really great engineers on our side. There are just hundreds of thousands of services, like you said, that really require people who know a lot to really lock it down. And yes, we're going to get a lot more capability with AI and other tools, but I think that we are further from the easy button than ever, just because of the proliferation of data, the proliferation of AI, the proliferation of infrastructure. It's more and more complex, not easy. So you do need, we knew at the very beginning that we would not be able to be all things to all people. And so when I got in touch with Eric and Mike, and we were just meeting at the CMMC conference back in San Diego for the Future Feed conferences, it was so cool to talk because we knew that we weren't going to be able to do everything. So can we partner with amazing organizations like HanaByte? And so you guys know how to build actual security solutions. And we're good at like, hey, do your awesome thing. And you can build your solution within Paramify, and then out of the box, you can repeat those things and deliver a great experience that's flexible for your customers, right? But
yeah, And it's amazing, to work hand in hand with your product team and so on, give them feedback on, what can be kind of, tweaked from the Paramify standpoint, that opportunities that we see to kind of work together. So a lot of really good synergy, right? It almost feels like, if I were to create a product, it would pretty much be Paramify. So let me just give all the stuff that I'd want to do, right, to you guys, so y'all could actually execute on it, because, I can't do everything all at once. And, if we focus on kind of delivering those solutions and building out our, I didn't think I mentioned yet that we do a ton of infrastructure as code.
Yeah, you do.
That also self-attests itself, I should say,
So sick.
because of policy as code.
Yeah.
Policy as code. And then we have a tool that will take the state file from Terraform and then map that to controls for, let's say, a NIST 853 baseline. So then when we get the SSP out of Paramify, we enrich it with all of that infrastructure as code, policy as code, continuous compliance data that we have.
We got to have
that goes into
a webinar. I'm just thinking we need to see this. Our people need to see this, right? Let's do a webinar for sure. That's so sick.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And we're about to get an SMB through the FedRAMP moderate process right now using that exact stack, right? Everything from Paramify to HanaByte's middleware to our actual, landing zone technology and so on. So
it's just the beginning for you guys. I'm just so pumped. It's just the beginning.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
We've only started a couple years ago, and we're still in our infancy. We're still getting a lot of traction in this area.
It's so cool. I mean, you're into this huge opportunity, and that's definitely where you want to be doing business. I've found, because I've built businesses that no one wanted to buy. No one wanted to buy anything. So let's talk about that. Maybe we can shift into the business side of it. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you guys face when it comes to, cloud security? So you mentioned some of the funny things at the beginning, because here you are, a cloud native, and then you go, okay, great. Like, so what are you guys using? And then you go and they're like, wait, you can't use Lambda functions? You can't, wait, what? So tell us a little bit about some of the other challenges that you have, right?
Yeah, I've kind of been working backwards, and this is true for me. We have folks on the team who started on-prem and then came to the cloud, so I don't want to speak for everyone at HanaByte, right? We always bring the right experts to the right engagements. But for myself, it was always a working backwards situation, which according to AWS is a good thing. But me being born in the cloud, I had to then learn about on-prem so that I can say like, okay, you're doing what on premise? Okay, there's some servers that I've got to figure that part out, right? It's like hardware switches. Okay. All right. Let me read up on that. Right. So it's like kind of going back, and then saying, okay, so now that I understand where you're coming from and how you want to use the cloud, this is a lot of the translation that we need to do in order to kind of assess our control. So to put it succinctly, we're able to get a lot of telemetry. We're able to get a lot of API calls from cloud-based systems. That's not the same on-prem. So when we deal with hybrid systems, which we do all the time, we need a different approach. So a lot of times that would, classically be some discovery that we ask questions, have some shoulder surfing sessions to kind of figure out what those are. But I've been trying my best to toil away that type of process as well when it comes to evidence gathering and so on. So we encourage folks to use like a GRC system to put everything in, so that then we can kind of take it from there. But we also know that that's not always a possible type of process. So that's one example of something that we see. But of course, cloud security threats, they're constantly evolving, and we're trying to stay on top of it. And another one is AI, of course, and folks' use of those services. We have to constantly update our quote unquote middleware in order to be able to translate a lot of like, okay, now you're using Gemini as for an example on Google, or maybe we're using Bedrock in Amazon. And now we need to adjust our tools and services for that new threat model. And we take everything from a NIST RMF standpoint, risk management framework. And we make sure that everything core to that kind of comes back into our automation and what we're doing to, accelerate ATOs and everything. So those are some challenges that we're finding in the cloud security space.
Man, so do you guys approach these challenges differently than other companies in your experience, or is it pretty typical for most companies doing this?
We again kind of meet folks where they're at. We're not the type of company that just sits back, because I've seen a lot of, especially risk advisory firms and so on, who again are approaching it from the other direction, from the compliance direction and getting into security. And they would say, give me this policy. And then they're like, well, we don't have it. Sorry, we can't do anything. I've seen that so many times, and it's so annoying. That's not what we do at HanaByte, though. We would say, hey, do you have a policy like this? No, we don't yet have one. It's okay. Let us kind of work together and build that out for you. And then, we'll make sure that attests to, whatever your information security program is and so on.
Right.
So definitely that warm approach. Again, yet another dichotomy that HanaByte was founded on, the warmth of having the EQ, and then the cold of having the IQ type of situation as well.
Totally. I mean, to your point, when you come from my background, which is audit, you do learn a ton about, very an inch deep and a mile wide about a lot of things. But when someone says, oh, so what do we do? We'll be like, well, what we've seen is, you know what? Let me connect you with this person, because you realize you actually don't know what you're talking about once you get into the details. And so the advantage that your background gives you is in those niche spaces where you guys specialize, you're going to actually be able to give them a solution and say, hey, no, we got this. I kind of figured that out later as I did other jobs that were more technical in nature, and those gave me an edge, because I learned about how to actually build stuff. But yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of folks that are just generalists, which I consider myself a generalist, and I just nerd out on the techie stuff. And I wish I could get into everything, but I can't really get into everything. Yeah. What are some of those key steps, organizations can take to improve their security posture right? I'm sure you've seen this multiple times and you're going to get better and better. What are some of the key steps people can take at the very beginning?
Yeah. So the first one is threat modeling and figuring out where your risks are.
Tell us about that, threat modeling.
Well, yeah, it's extremely important to understand the workloads that you're trying to do. Kind of take a step back and say, why are we doing this again? And look at the business use case and figure out who the customers are and so on. It's okay, from there, now the software that we're delivering, how can it go wrong? What are the things that we're missing here? Or maybe what are the risks that we definitely need to kind of keep in mind, and then work backwards from there, right? I've worked on a lot of compliance engagements where they're saying, oh, well, the scope is only cloud. It's not applications or anything like that. And that never made sense to me, because I'm coming from a software engineering background. I'm like, you have to have all the components of the system together so that you can then properly assess the risk. And it's key to know the applications that are running on top of, your servers. You're deploying Python functions, Lambda, that's fantastic, but what kind of dependencies do they have? Getting a lot deeper into where things can go wrong is very important, and map out the whole process. You can, start off on a whiteboard as an example. Just say, from code to cloud, what am I looking at? You may be looking at everything from the developer's IDE to the build system to then your cloud infrastructure that it's deployed on. And throughout that process, I did a really good talk on this, by the way, at DevOps Days Birmingham last year. is how do we generate software provenance throughout the entire life cycle? And then how do we use that as evidence that, our basically our software that is then running on the cloud hasn't been tampered with? Because again, you can have a really secure, adherent to NIST 853 as an example, environment to the T.
Images, right? If you're deploying those images, but if something, go ahead. Yeah,
but if you don't have your software also vetted as well, that becomes a huge issue. So that's why I always say start off with the threat modeling, start your backlog from there, and that would be a really good first actionable step.
Yeah, I was just talking about this with a client because you can be, for example, in GovCloud where you have FIPS-enabled endpoints, between the infrastructure, but applications might be running on something that is not FIPS mode, right? And so that's going to be a problem when you're going for FedRAMP High or even FedRAMP Moderate, right? Is making sure that you have FIPS mode enabled in that environment. That could be a challenge. It's not too bad, but again, so another one of your specialties is supply chain risk. If you have a vendor dependency in that threat model, you say, hey, we have this piece of software that is maintained by someone in another country, and you're like, oh, you're going to get a POAM item or some sort of issue, and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. And it's going to be a vendor dependency, and it's going to show up every week, every month, right? Tough. So threat modeling is important, right? In your software.
Yeah, that is a constant thing. Secondly, and where's all of your telemetry and data kind of coming from, right? So
your SIM.
Knowing how to monitor, getting your SIM in place, figuring out, what services need to be enabled within your cloud environment to gain visibility and to produce findings for the SIM and so on. All of that is very important as well. Having that visibility, the more visibility you have, the easier it's going to be to find things that are wrong within your environment and so on. One of the first things we check for is making sure that alerts are not only being generated, but also being actioned upon. And is there a huge amount of alerts that are occurring that we can then, decrease the false positives on? For instance, I have a consultant working on an engagement for us where we're battling real estate fraud, which is a very interesting topic, could be its own webinar, right? And they've deployed a web application firewall, but they're getting so many alerts on it that he's really just working on tuning that firewall down, because as part of them being in a compliant environment, if you're not taking actions on the alerts that you're having, then your incident response program is really not a good incident response program. So
Classic.
A lot of times we have to kind of get into that.
Classic. Yeah. Hey, we got the WAF going. I'm like, hey, it was just yelling at me all the time, right? So I just kept tuning it, and now I don't get any more alerts. It's working, right?
It's working. Exactly.
Classic. Yeah. Now my NIDs are working. Amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Classic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you balance like the need for security with flexibility and scalability? Because you come from dev and then you got into security, but you and I both know that building cool stuff and security, they're at odds, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's tough because as we're building new features and products and so on, security in many times is kind of like the Department of No, where it's like, not yet. No, we can't. It's going to take a while for us to get approvals in different stages and things like that. This is where a lot of times we can utilize automation and so on to produce the signals that the security team needs to make quicker decisions, to make more informed decisions, and to kind of enable developers to then release their code to production quicker. So it's a win-win-win situation, but you have a good amount of upfront effort in building out a pipeline in order to do this. And that is a common pattern that we've seen, when helping organizations in delivering software and infrastructure quicker is, well, for instance, if you're using our templates that have that policy as code, and that policy as code has a report that could then be generated that the security team could take a look at, plus could be evidence gathering for OSCA, which is pretty cool in your SSP, then you kind of see constantly as you're deploying software, is all the security items being checked, is this a significant impact to our system, and allows them to make a quicker risk impact analysis essentially within the system, especially for significant changes, which may require a change to your documentation. But it helps whenever we have that telemetry, and when we have that telemetry hooked up to like an automated system.
Make it easy, make it as easy as possible for folks that need to do security to do the right thing. So our whole focus as security professionals is how are we making it easy to do the right thing? Because if we don't make it easy to do the right thing, humans will not do the right thing. There's maybe 10% of the people that will always, I'm going to do this because it's right, but most of us, if the environment is not conducive to do the right thing, we're not going to do it, right? So, and then there's 10% of the people that will just do the wrong thing no matter what, right? They'll still click on the link, and so that's why you gotta have layers of security. And again, it's a journey, and it's an iterative process that you got to go through. Yeah. So, man, I think we have to do some more webinars. I'm excited for this success story. We got to dive into that on another opportunity. But what are some of the emerging trends in cloud security that businesses should be aware of?
So the advent of AI is upon us, and that is unleashing a lot of different threats and so on within the environments. Now we have new vocabulary like prompt injection and large language models and these types of things. Again, I gave a pretty decent talk on earlier this year about the threats that AI pose within a cloud environment. But this is definitely an emerging threat that a lot of companies just don't know how to handle at this moment. So they block the use of AI services until this kind of thing could be handled. Being able to have a good framework for AI, which, by the way, there's a NIST AI risk management framework, pretty decent. So ISO 42000, also addresses this as well. I would definitely encourage folks to look at those compliance frameworks as guidelines into security. But obviously, with threat modeling, what AI can do, you have to look at everything from the data that it's being fed, or that it's being trained on, I should say, to how it's handling inputs and how it's then reacting to those inputs and so on. I found a really interesting prompt injection the other day where you can append a string at the end of a URL, and you send that over to the LLM, and the LLM then renders that back and can create a lot of cross-site scripting in a novel way.
Whoa,
so
that is interesting.
Yeah, and it's because of the way that the prompt is saying, hey, repeat back to me everything that I am saying, and then it sends this URL, and it sends the URL back, renders the HTML, and then you get some interesting behaviors that way.
Crazy. Yeah,
different threats for different environments, of course, with the advent of AI. And AI, on the flip side, is also helping a lot with threat hunting, which, again, entirely other podcast if we so wanted to talk
threat
about
hunting,
that. But
100%, really important. So how do you see the role of automation enhancing security and compliance efforts to come, to kind of help here?
So I think a lot of going back to the point of making it easier to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing is a lot of what automation's all about. So I think I've mentioned a good bit about the startups and small, medium-sized businesses, which is the sweet spot right now of companies that we work with. But I've also worked on those really large companies where they needed advice on how to embrace automation. And these would be security teams asking, Eric, how do we incorporate DevSecOps within our ecosystem? And what does that mean for us? This type of thing. And of course, the answer is a lot more than just build a pipeline. It's building an entire, build structure from your Git repo to deploying into the cloud, but also implementing guardrails within the cloud, which will automate, denying specific permissions whenever that's occurring within the environment. And I think I mentioned this on a webinar once. I compare that to, I have a daughter, of course, she's about a year old now, but she likes to crawl around the house and everything. And one of the first things she'll do when she finds an electrical socket is try to put her finger into it. These guardrails that we're building into the cloud environments, service control policies, organization policies, those types of things, are kind of like those covers that you put on those electrical outlets to make sure, the kid is safe and everything. Not attuning developers to kids or anything like that, but the concept is
100%.
exactly
I'm a dad of 5.
Similar, right?
Yeah, kids will exploit any weakness, right? Any control weakness, and they'll show you where you didn't even design a control. You're like, I would have never thought in a million years that that's what someone would have done. And, it's, and then when you have your kids saying, hey, Dad, where do you keep the fire extinguisher? I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on? Right? You know what I mean? Like, I'm like,
that question's being asked.
Yeah,
that brings up some
like,
red flags.
Wait, what's going on? Which is, compliance is kind of like that. You definitely want to, you don't want to scare people. You don't want to scare your auditors. But
to kind of put a bow on all that, right, is, we have the guardrails that we put in place. We have a happy path. If you go through this pipeline, your stuff is going to go smoothly, and if it doesn't go smoothly, there's a team that can support this pipeline, right? Don't try building your own pipelines. If you do, you're going to go through a lot more scrutiny. Don't try being the 10% that you mentioned of people who will always try to go through something and try to do your own thing, because you're just going to get blocked by the guardrails that we put in place. But instead, go through our one, maybe several different pipelines, these pre-approved ones that have security scanning, has all that telemetry and data, a lot of the things that are conductive to giving the correct feedback loops to the security teams and to developers. Kind of giving those really short feedback loops helps a lot in being able to make risk-based decisions and making those decisions on the fly. That is key. And ensuring that we can spread that through an organization is extremely key, because the more we can get through automated pipelines, the more telemetry we can get, the more control assessments, security impact analysis that we can do on the fly, the more policy as code we can get through there, the easier it gets for developers, security, and compliance. And then we see a pretty decent harmony there in doing this. And that's what excites me, is kind of like old Eric, 10, 15 years ago, that was just building out this stuff on AWS, trying to just deploy my PHP code onto the server, to now hundreds of deployments a day in an organization, but having this massive amount of data and technology and so on, and then harnessing that in order to produce actionable results in event-oriented architecture. That's key. And that's exactly the superpowers that security teams need in order to, move on to what's next, right?
Yeah, I mean, you need this capability if you're going to approach FedRAMP, right? Otherwise, you just it's millions of dollars. You're going to be spending millions of dollars if you don't do it in a smart and collected way. And so I'm excited for the changes coming that we talked about at the very beginning of the podcast. But how are you seeing FedRAMP help your clients? What does it enable? What does that mean to have an ATO?
Yeah. So to have the ATO means you've gone through the process of building out your product to production, and you have either an agency sponsor or you've been sponsored by the JAB, and you also then have gone through an audit process by a third-party auditor to ensure that your FedRAMP controls are in place. They do a readiness assessment report, which is then submitted over to the federal agency, a sponsor, or to the JAB, whoever it may be. And, you have your continuous monitoring program in place, right? So it's a lot of just checks and so on to make sure that whatever federal data you're processing is secure. But what that does is once you get through that onerous process, classically, can take 15 months,
Right.
average-ish. We at HanaByte have reduced that significantly.
I love it.
And I just read your blog about a FedRAMP high SSP in 3.5 hours, which is super cool.
Wild?
Can't wait. That is wild.
Isn't that wild?
It's wild.
And it's
wild
happened multiple
because-
times now. And it's
wild
because
the-
we have solutions like yours, the ones you're building, and they can build those out, and we already know what they are, and we know where they're connected. If you mention Splunk in one place and it's configured in such and such way, you don't need to talk about it 55 more times, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. No, I thought it was crazy that they said, well, we need this Rev 5 ATO package in like less than a week, and we haven't done anything. And then I think the next line in the blog was that it didn't even phase you, and you're like, yeah, man, we could do that. I'm like, wow, that is confidence there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's key as well, right? To like going through this ATO process. But anyway, nonetheless, from 3.5 hours to 18 months, however long it takes, the business now has the ability to sell to the federal government, and the federal government is the biggest purchaser of software. I think they're the biggest employer in the world, if I remember correctly. And there's a lot of money to be made from that, a lot of steady multi-year contracts to be made from that. So it enables a good bit from a business perspective on just bringing these products to what we like to refer to as mission holders, whether that be, folks who are in the military, DOD, going out there fighting wars, or whether it be folks working here back home, just making things more efficient for us, or doing whatever the federal government does nowadays. So, or whatever it doesn't. I mean, any aspect of your life, right? And I think it's key to federal's government's modernization efforts to embrace these cloud-based solutions, to not have to, just do on-prem types of solutions all the times, because again, as we've mentioned in this podcast, there's a lot of innovation going on around cloud, around automation, around AI. There's just a ton of potential out there, and that's what FedRAMP kind of brings up to the table.
Yeah. You've been so great. I've been just coming at you with questions, and you've been awesome. I got a couple more.
Sure, go for it. Yeah.
And I just want to get your thoughts here, right? So if you have, you guys are doing really well. You have a lot of clients coming your way. What advice do you give to organizations if they're just starting their FedRAMP journey? Like they have no idea what to do. What advice do you give to them?
Yeah, I would say the first thing you want to do is get someone in your corner who knows FedRAMP. They would have someone who can just shepherd you through the process closer to the beginning. Finding the right partner is difficult. It really is, because there's hundreds of different FedRAMP partners out there. But find one that can meet you where you're at, right? And not necessarily one that, just says you must complete this, this, and this before doing business with us, because that's already sitting off some red flags, right? Not pointing out anybody specifically, but that's been my take on consultancies, in the past, right? But even more so than that, get a good asset and inventory within your or application inventory within your environment as well. Understand what your solution comprises of, and if the solution is ready for production and it's ready to be sold to the federal government. Because many times, if you don't have that agency sponsor yet, if you don't have that JAB, sponsor yet, anything like that, then you're kind of dead in the water in the process at this point.
Hopefully that gets better. Yeah. Hopefully that gets easier. That particular hurdle is brutal, right? Where people can't actually fulfill, the RFQ, right? You can't even participate in it, or you can't deliver it because you don't have a sponsor. So I'm hopeful that changes. So
yeah, I'm hopeful too. Again, the OMB memo from last year kind of says there's going to be alternatives ways for the ATO to occur, which includes not having to have an agency sponsor. I believe it's going to be the FSCAC has a hand in this as well, but the FedRAMP PMO should be able to bring folks through the FedRAMP process. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's what the OMB memo was saying.
That's right.
And that's going to be huge, because now folks who want to prepare themselves for that don't have to go through that hurdle right now. But as of now, as part of my 3 advice that I kind of in there, one, have a good inventory of your applications, assets,
threat modeling, right? Yep.
Threat modeling, absolutely. And having that agency sponsor and having that partner in your corner as well. That's the key to success.
I love it.
If you try to do it yourself in the beginning, and then, which you could, by the way, I've seen organizations do it themselves just fine. But that's also a common pitfall. It's like they believe they have a good handle on things. Then they go and spend a lot of money on 3PAL to come in and audit things just to tell them, oh, you've got a lot to do. Then they come in and try to find the partner, and it's like, yeah, we could have prevented you from all that kind of mess in the beginning, but here we are to get you through that. Been through that a couple of times. That's why I say start from the beginning. Just have someone, kind of walk you through the process.
It sounds like Hana wants to bite someone. I could hear her barking.
You could hear her. Oh, that's funny.
Just kidding. That's all right. No, hey, so last question. I think a lot of our listeners could learn a lot from you, and I'm excited. We're gonna do this webinar, Eric. This is gonna be amazing, right? So, anyways, what advice do you give to those who are just starting their careers in cybersecurity or in DevOps, or maybe they're auditors and they're like just kind of a little anxious about the journey ahead? What advice do you have for them?
So my advice would be open up a cloud account. There's free tiers on AWS, Google, Azure. Take your pick, right? That's where I got my start. And using those free materials that are out there, along with all the free training that you have, along with folks like me that just like to mentor folks for free, that is an amazing situation. It's amazing that we don't have to buy a lot of hardware. You don't need any special access to a data center. Hana will agree with me. That you can just start building out architectures. You can start kind of learning how a web server works, how typical 3-tier architecture looks like, all on the free tier. This doesn't cost a lot of money at all. I would just take some time, to kind of get in there, get hands-on, get dirty with it. I've seen so many people kind of go the other way and try to go from academics to then purchasing like a really intensive course and then getting a certification without the hands-on experience. And then it's like, okay, well, I don't know how beneficial that would be versus just learning how to build things on the cloud. My personal advice would be just kind of start from the free tier, move forward, get some training, find some people on LinkedIn, and don't be shy, message them out. A lot of folks like myself and others who like to mentor kind of do it for fun and do it for free. And that's the way to go.
Fortune favors action, right? Life is going to favor you if you actually go out and do it. There was that interesting anecdote, I know we're supposed to close. I know you got to get going, but like, this is an interesting anecdote I had, I came across, I think at something like the masterclass in Atomic Habits. I've read the book, but for whatever reason, it really stuck with me. There was a class that a professor taught in photography, and he said at the very beginning, he's like, okay, you get to choose how you're going to be graded. This half of the class, you get a grade if you give us 100 photos, right? If you submit 100 photos, you get an A. If you do 89, you get a B, right? It was really clear what they needed to do, to get their grade. And then if you sit on this side, you just need to submit 1, and then I'll grade you on the quality of the photo. And where would you think, the highest quality came from? Where did it come from?
Probably, I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah. I mean, because I would think, oh yeah, like all you had to do is the 1, but no, the quality came from the other side because the photographers were in the practice of iterating and improving over and over and over and over again. Like, think about it. You take 100 photos, you're probably going to get better. You're going to get better. And it's less focus on academic and thinking about, hey, how could we do this? And so if you just get out, like Eric is saying, and just get going, just build and iterate and improve. And that is security. Iterate, improve. You're going to suck at first, and you're going to suck, and that's okay. You're going to get experience, and you're going to get, if you can get a guide to help you suck less at the very beginning, great. But eventually you're going to get going. So Eric, where do they learn more about HanaByte? Tell our listeners.
Yeah. Check us out at hanabyte.com, HanaByte.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn if you type it up there. Follow us, and that's where you can find us.
All right, man. Well, love it. Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate your time. This was awesome.
Definitely. Thanks. Really appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you later.